Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
The Log4j saga, week 1. U.S. Airlines warn 5G wireless could wreak havoc with flights, and work from home is leading to fear fatigue. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and most certainly some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Patty Titus, the Chief Privacy and Information Security Officer at Markel. Patty, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Can't wait to get into the stories. Of course, we want to thank our sponsor, Times. We'll be talking about them a little bit later in the show, but want to just give them a quick shout out for making the show possible. And you can join us on LinkedIn Live. Just go to CISOseries.com and look for the Week in Review page to find the link, get in on the chat, and all sorts of other great live stuff. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's just hop right into it. We've got new details on the Log4 shell attacks. This is the story that's really gripped the cybersecurity world over this past week and just kind of finding out more details. Here's kind of what we know right now. Researchers at Cisco and Cloudflare report that they first saw attacks on the Log4j utility observed back on December 1st. That's before it was publicly disclosed, although mass exploitation wasn't seen until after that public disclosure. Microsoft and the firm Mandiant, meanwhile, report that they've observed groups with ties to China, Iran, Turkey, and North Korea launching attacks with the exploit. Not surprising, but still pretty quick after the initial disclosure. And as of yesterday, it's been strongly recommended that everyone update to version 2.16.0 as soon as possible, even if you've just updated to 2.15.0, which presumably originally was supposed to be the patch version. This issue has kept everyone busy this week, Patty, including yourself. Just kind of want to leave out an open question about, what's your take on the vulnerability, timing, the scope of the impact, and how you and the cybersecurity community are kind of responding to it.
So this one's a pretty big one. I think it's going to have a pretty big long tail on it, probably far-reaching implications. It's because we've already seen another patch come out. Hopefully that's it, and that will fix the exploit. I think we're going to probably spend some time on this one. When you've got two patches coming out hot on the heels of each other, that's not necessarily a good sign. And to be honest with you, we're starting to become accustomed to these. We've seen far more zero-day vulnerabilities coming out in 2021 than we've seen in previous years. So I think we're just going to see more of these, and we've got to be able to react. It definitely keeps us from having to do a tabletop exercise because we're getting plenty of real-life exercises. And to be honest with you, there's really no vacations in cybersecurity. So the timing of this event, if it's the weekend or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, it just happens to be a few weeks before a longer holiday or when companies are closing their books for the year. So the timing's never good. This one's particularly awkward.
Yeah, we've even seen the federal government saying that civilian agencies have to have a Log4j patched before Christmas, essentially coming out and saying that. In terms of the speed at which you can patch this kind of stuff, being a logging utility, obviously it's commonly used because it's incredibly useful. Does that make it any more particularly challenging to kind of roll out a patch quickly for large organizations?
I think it's more complicated only in that you've got to first look at the landscape and see what's vulnerable. So a lot of companies, a lot of your third-party vendor risk management companies stepped up to the plate, came out and said, you can scan at least your external perimeter. You can find the weakness, catalog it against what your products are internal. You better hope your CMDB is in a good place. So your asset management, if you're not doing good in asset management, I think that's where companies might have a challenge of trying to find where this weakness and vulnerability is.
And any of these recent disclosures, the fact that this wasn't just like a really horrible flaw that we found, and then people have kind of started to exploit it. The fact that it was exploited kind of before going public, and that we're seeing APTs now getting organizing either tests or full out attacks using it. Does that change any of the calculations for this, or is this like, this is really bad, we need to fix it anyway, and this is just evidence of how bad it is?
I think it puts more pressure on the incident response team and your patching team. It's now known. So if you're exploited, your company might look at it and say, "Hey, we knew about this. Why didn't you do something faster?"
Hmm.
The problem is you've got to do regression testing and check all your applications, and so it's not a simple. I decide to patch it today, like you would a Mac or a PC if you've got. A vulnerability on one of those and you set your updates, you got to test your applications or you're going to break your business. So it's a little bit more challenging than just deciding to push a button and push a patch. There's a lot of testing that has to happen and a lot of coordination across many teams. It's not just a security team, it's the whole IT ecosystem has got to be involved.
All right, well, our next story here, cyber incident reporting mandates suffer another congressional setback. A compromised version of the fiscal 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, was released Tuesday, and it leaves out language which would have set timeframes for when critical infrastructure owners and operators must report major incidents, and some companies would have had to have report making ransomware payments. So, Patty, is this an issue of partisan politics? Is like just the anytime we say the word mandate automatically becomes a partisan issue? Or does this veer toward maybe looking into the right of corporate privacy overtaking public safety? I'm just curious on your thoughts on this.
I think there's a lot of discussion about the language of how it was written to begin with. And I
Hmm.
think there's got to be a lot of clarifying language, which otherwise it creates a lot of loopholes for potential litigation or lawsuits against companies that get caught in it took us longer than whatever the prescribed time is in the legislation. I don't think it's necessarily a bipartisan problem. I think the problem is bipartisan and that comprehensive legislation is always hard to pass. There's a lot of people who have to agree to it. And so getting that language crisp and clear is super important to those of us who have to take that and then operationalize it.
Yeah, and we've seen that, kind of not necessarily with cybersecurity, but looking at things like GDPR, where a lot of that ambiguity kind of had to be sorted out in the courts or in local interpretation of that law and led to a lot of confusion down the line. I mean, I think disclosure of these kind of things is important, but also making sure that it doesn't create knock-on effects, I think, is a really good point as well. Kind of in the same vein here, our next story, North American propane distributor Superior Plus discloses ransomware attack. The company said it discovered the breach on Sunday, December 12th, and that as a response, it took steps to mitigate impact on corporate data and operations. Chris Clements, the VP of Solutions Architecture at Cerberus Sentinel, points out that the attack was only detected after the ransomware was deployed, but that it's unclear for how long the attackers actually had access to Superior Plus's systems before that. And Clemens goes on to say normal attacker dwell times typically extend weeks or months before they trigger ransomware. During that time, attackers can pivot throughout a victim's network and attempt to escalate their access level to gain complete control of all systems and data. Mass scale data exfiltration has also become the norm in these events that can trigger a secondary extortion attempt or accessory demand from attackers. So, Clemens kind of just outlining what the landscape is, I think, for a lot of ransomware with that quote, but I think it nicely distilled kind of the current conundrum that a lot of organizations find when disclosing ransomware attacks and what that actually means. But it's also, this kind of comes in with being an infrastructure company. Should we be more public as a warning sign to others about being more proactive? I'm curious, when it comes to dwell time and stuff like that, do these public infrastructure companies or critical infrastructure companies, not public, excuse me, these critical infrastructure companies have, I guess, more of a burden to be more transparent?
I This kind of gets back to the conversation previously, where it's really important that when you have an event happen in your company, you've got to really look to see what happened and what are the far-reaching implications. Yes, it's important in critical infrastructure to come out and say, we've got a problem, we're going to work on it, we're going to solve it. Um, I think critical infrastructure in general sees us taking a hard look at it. I think we're going to see Jen Easterly's team focusing on it and trying to help make sure that there's good language around reporting incidents and events, because it's really an indicator for the rest of us from a threat intelligence perspective. If they're being targeted, what's the downside effect to that? Obviously, power is probably the worst. Um, and of course, all of the other, this time of year, propane's not a great thing to be out of either. So, yeah, I think how they're going to recover from this is as important. Critical infrastructure's got to have better continuity of operations planning. They've got to get better at being able to recover from these events.
All right, before we move on to our next story, we want to spend a few moments with our sponsor, Tynes. Tynes is no-code automation for security teams trusted by the world's best companies like Canva, Auth0, and Coinbase. This holiday season, book a 10-minute demo of Tynes and they'll donate $100 to your favorite charity. They're that certain you'll love what you see. Head on over to tynes.com/charity to book your 10-minute demo and send $100 to your favorite charity. All right, next up here, researchers uncover new coexistence attacks on Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chips just when they were getting along. A new attack technique makes it possible to leverage a device's Bluetooth component to directly extract network passwords and manipulate traffic on a Wi-Fi chip. Coexistence refers to a mechanism wherein Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, LTE, those kind of things all share the same components and resources, things like antenna or wireless spectrum, necessitating that these communication standards coordinate the spectrum access to avoid collisions when operating in the same frequency. Chipset vendors use the principle to allow Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to operate virtually concurrently. So this is kind of a long established, but now an attack is targeting that. Looks kind of inevitable, Patty, when you're kind of having highly popular devices all occupying the same space here. This was a proof of concept, not an attack. So that's important to point out. What recommendation might you give to chipset makers or kind of end users when seeing something like this? This kind of proof of concept.
Yeah, I think it's important. If it's a proof of concept, it won't be long before it's starting to be exploited. So I do think the chip companies have to get together with um, other wireless providers and looking at their testing to make sure the collisions aren't happening and that there's separation. Um, I do think since it's already started, it will likely take firmware upgrades to fix it. So I guess when we buy our new latest smartphone is when we're going to see that one fixed. It feels a bit like the meltdown Spectre from many years ago, where we had to do full-on hardware upgrades. This one kind of feels like it might be heading in that direction as well.
Yeah,
Kind
this kind of remind me of like what we've been seeing lately with advances in row hammer attacks. I know those are like super targeted and like they're mostly theoretical, but like kind of the argument being like, no, this is a fundamental issue with this type of design versus like, hey, we can logically isolate this in software, depending. So it seems like there's firmware updates coming that should fix this, but definitely still, again, like you said, if proof of concepts are out there, the exploits soon follow.
Yeah, a little bit of bad timing here on the supply chain disruptions too, on the chip problems.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Next up here, U.S. Airlines warn 5G wireless could wreak havoc with flights. United Airlines is not happy with plans by wireless carriers to use spectrum for 5G wireless services starting January 5th. The airline claims it could disrupt thousands of daily flights and cost air passengers $1.6 billion annually in delays. And United CEO Scott Kirby went so far as to say, unless something changes, we will not be able to use radio altimeters at 40-something of the largest airports in the country, meaning in the event of bad weather, cloud cover, or heavy smog, you could only do visual approaches, essentially. Those are some feisty words coming out of United. I guess I'm kind of bitter with the whole like Wi-Fi on flights thing. That I'm now suspicious of all airline radio frequency. I know there are a lot of reasons, like very legitimate reasons, to definitely take these words seriously. However, is this just something else that the public is going to have to kind of deal with an intrusion, or not an intrusion, but this is just the reality of what flying is going to be, and will the carriers or will the wireless carriers listen to these concerns, I guess, from the airlines? How seriously should we take these?
I find it hard to believe, first of all, that 5G and that spectrum has not been analyzed by the FAA and the airline. So I
Mhm.
find this one a little bit mind-boggling to me. Normally, they're well ahead of it. It may be there's an opportunity for a little innovation in that. What was the device that isn't going to work? Is it the
The
altimeter?
radio altimeter.
Yeah, so it's time for innovation. Here's an opportunity for a company that wants to swap out all of the airlines altimeters for something that's not going to be disrupted by 5G. So this one I find a little bit hard to believe in that it's going to really let's get this one fixed. I mean, as a person who likes to travel a lot, let's get this one fixed pretty quick so that we don't end up with a catastrophe that goes back to someone who didn't turn their phone off when they got on the plane and it took the aircraft down seriously. So this one makes me nervous a bit.
In other news, I'm accepting VC funding for my software-defined radio altimeter business that I'm starting. If anyone's interested, you can find it at scam@startup.com. Don't go there. I don't know. That's probably a spam site. Don't go there.
Probably.
Next up here, employees feel safe from cyber threats when using company devices. A study of 2,000 employees in the US and UK conducted by Menlo Security reveals more than half of respondents report performing non-work related tasks, such as online shopping, on company devices, believing they're secure from cyber threats if they're using a company device. As a result, they are unintentionally exposing their corporate networks to a slew of vulnerabilities. Patty, this is kind of a bookend issue. On the other side, you have BYOD and kind of introducing the same problems of, doing personal stuff when you're also doing work stuff on that for kind of the opposite reasons. Is this almost like a communication problem? Like, my work gave me this, so it must be more secure. So it's the best place to do my insecure things because it's more secure?
I think people do feel like I'm safer on the corporate network doing my banking or things like that than I am on my home network. Part of the problem we found with COVID when everybody went to remote work is their day never ended. So their computing behavior changed. So all of a sudden they went from doing email and doing corporate work to gaming or shopping or whatever it is that people do online. No judgment here. So, yeah, I think people feel safe, and I kind of get that. The problem is that it creates lots of issues for those of us who have to respond when you click on a link, thinking that you're going to a new shoe shopping site, and you end up in a bad place.
At startup.scam.com. That's you don't want to go. Don't want to go there. All right, and our final story of the day, fear fatigue exploits cybersecurity of remote employees. Malwarebytes has revealed that nearly 80% of respondents to their survey reported some level of fear fatigue within their organization. Fear fatigue is defined as the demotivation to follow recommended protective behaviors and can often lead to employees' negligent behavior, such as opening an email attachment without properly scrutinizing the sender or neglecting to turn on a VPN when using public Wi-Fi. So, we're seeing kind of overload, or maybe we call this burnout also. I feel like this is all kind of in that same bucket here. Maybe a little sense of utility leading to another kind of bookend issue, as opposed to like outright defiance of corporate security protocols and just kind of flying in the face of those, but kind of leading to the same outcomes. Patty, what can we do about this kind of feeling seems to be cropping up across organizations?
Yeah, so we refer to it as cyber fatigue. So when you're constantly barraged with don't click here, don't do that, don't, and people are just like, I'm kind of over it. Um, Unfortunately, cybersecurity professionals sometimes have the challenge of not just saying what and how to do things, but the why part is really critical. So why shouldn't we click on links? I know there are some companies in financial services that have a three strikes, you're out. So I don't think these people would survive in the three strikes, you're out. They'd be collecting unemployment. Um, but I also think that it's really important to educate people on the why part. And I also think this does give a little bit of credence to your insider threat program. So when people are purposefully doing things, you're going to see a pattern. And the question really is there a way to isolate them on the network in an area where they can do no harm? So to speak. So there are some technologies out there that allow you to put a person in an area, a sandbox, basically, where they can still get their job done, but The concept is they cannot do as much harm as they could if they were in the open corporate environment.
All right, Patty, before we get out of your excellent thoughts, really appreciate all of your insight on this, but was there any story that was kind of a thumbs up, an eye roller, just something you reacted strongly to one way or the other?
Yeah, I'd say it's got to be the altimeter issue with 5G. That one's that's come on, people, let's get our stuff together before we start putting the traveling public in harm's way.
All right, and Patty, where can people find you if they are so inclined to follow your great work?
Aside from coming on down to beautiful Richmond, Virginia, you can actually find me on LinkedIn, but don't look for Patty Titus. You won't find her, but you will find Patricia Titus. So my professional persona versus my we're now friends. So.
Well, so I can safely say, Patty Titus, the Chief Privacy and Information Security Officer at Markel, thank you so much for being here. This has been a blast, and I really appreciate your time on this.
Great. Thanks, Rich.
All right. And we also want to thank our sponsor, Tynes, for their support of the show and help make it possible. Just a reminder, we are not going to be having our live Fridays over the holiday season. So Week in Review will be back on January 7th, and our video chats will return January 21st. I hope everybody has some safe and happy holidays. But you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every day. It gets you caught up in about 6 minutes. So make sure you check out your podcast feed for that. And also wanted to announce we're hiring. The CISO series is looking for an associate producer. All the details about this exciting opportunity, work with the A team here, you can find all about at CISOseries.com. Get all the details about all of our shows right there. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.